हेलो दोस्तों, बिगिनर्स पॉइंट में आपका स्वागत है। और अभी हम कर रहे हैं इकोनॉमिक्स। इससे पहले के चैप्टर नहीं देखे तो प्लेलिस्ट बना रखी है, उसमें जाकर आप देख सकते हैं। इससे पहले कर लिया था, अब पढ़ेंगे ह्यूमन कैपिटल और ह्यूमन डेवलपमेंट। द टू टर्म्स साउंड सिमिलर बट देयर इज क्लियर डिस्टिंक्शन बिटवीन दैम। ये दोनों सुनने में तो एक जैसे लग रहे हैं, लेकिन काफ़ी अंतर है। ह्यूमन कैपिटल कंसिडर्स एजुकेशन एंड हेल्थ हैज़ अ मीन्स टू इंक्रीज लेबर प्रोडक्टिविटी. Human development is based on the idea that education and health are integral to human well-being, because only when people have the ability to read and write, the ability to lead a long and healthy life, they will be able to make other choices which they value. Human capital treats human beings as a means to an end, the end being the increase in productivity. In this view, any investment in education and health is unproductive if it does not enhance output of goods and services. In the human development perspective, human beings are ends in themselves. Human welfare should be increased through investments in education and health, even if such investments do not result in higher labor productivity. Therefore, basic education and basic health are important in themselves, irrespective of their contribution to labor productivity. In such a view, every individual has a right to get basic education and basic health care. That is, every individual has a right to be literate and lead a healthy life. अब आ जाते हैं स्टेट ऑफ ह्यूमन कैपिटल फॉर्मेशन इन इंडिया. In this section, we are going to analyze human capital formation in India. We have already learned that human capital formation is the outcome of investments in education, health, and on-the-job training, migration, and information. On these, education and health are very important sources of human capital formation. We know that India is a federal country with a union government, state governments, and local governments, municipal corporations, municipalities, and village panchayats. The Constitution of India mentions the functions to be carried out by each level of government. Accordingly, expenditures on both education and health are to be carried out simultaneously by an the three tiers of the government. Analysis of health sector is taken up in chapter 8. Hence, we will analyze only the education sector here. इसमें हम क्या बात करेंगे, ओनली एजुकेशन सेक्टर की. बाकी जो हेल्थ सेक्टर है वो चैप्टर 8 में हम डिस्कस करेंगे. डू यू नो हु टेक्स केयर ऑफ एजुकेशन एंड हेल्थ इन इंडिया? बिफोर वी टेक अप द एनालिसिस ऑफ द एजुकेशन सेक्टर इन इंडिया, we will look into the need for government intervention in education and health sectors. We do understand that education and health care services create both private and social benefits, and this is the reason for the existence of both private and public institutions in the education and health services markets. Expenditures on education and health make substantial long-term impact, and they cannot be easily reversed. Hence, government intervention is essential. For instance, once a child is admitted to a school or health care center where the required services are not provided, before the decision is taken to shift the child to another institution, substantial amount of damage would have been done. Moreover, individual consumers of these services do not have complete information about the quality of services and their cost. In this situation, the providers of education and health services acquire monopoly power and are involved in exploitation. The role of government in this situation is to ensure that the private providers of these services adhere to the standards stipulated by the government and charge the correct price. In India, the ministries of education at the union and state level, departments of education, and various organizations like National Council of Educational Research and Training (NCERT), University Grants Commission (UGC), and All India Council of Technical Education (AICTE) AICTE, All India Council of Technical Education, facilitate institutions which come under the education sector. Similarly, the ministries of health at the union and state level, departments of health, and various organizations like National Medical Commission and Indian Council for Medical Research (ICMR) facilitate institutions which come under the health sector. In a developing country like India, with a large section of the population living below the poverty line, many people cannot afford to access basic education and healthcare facilities. Moreover, a substantial section of India's population cannot afford to reach super specialty health care and higher education. Furthermore, when basic education and health care is considered as a right of citizens, then it is essential that the government should provide education and health services free of cost for the diverse deserving citizens and those from the socially oppressed classes. oppressed classes. Both the union and state governments have been stepping up expenditures in the education sector over the years in order to fulfill the objective of attaining cent per percent cent percent literacy and considerably increase the average educational attainment of Indians. Education sector in India. Growth in government expenditure on education. Do you know how much the government spends on education? This expenditure by the government is expressed into two ways: as a percentage of total government expenditure, as a percentage of gross domestic product (GDP). The percentage of education expenditure of total government expenditure indicates the importance of education in the scheme of things before the government. The percentage of education expenditure of GDP express how much of people's income is being committed to the development of education in the country. During 1952 to 220, education expenditure has percentage of total government expenditure increased from 7.92 to 16.54 and has percentage of GDP increased from 0.64 to 4.47. Throughout this period, the increase in education expenditure has not been uniform and there has been irregular rise and fall. To this, if we include the private expenditure incurred by individuals and by philanthropic institutions, the total education expenditure should be much higher. इसका मतलब होता है परोपकारी इंस्टीट्यूशंस जो होते हैं. Elementary education takes a major share total education expenditure and the share of the higher tertiary education institutions of higher learnings like colleges, polytechnics, and universities is the least. So, on an average, the government spends less on tertiary education expenditure per student in tertiary education is higher than that of elementary. This does not mean that financial resources should be transferred from tertiary education to elementary education. As we expand school education, we need more teachers who are trained in the higher educational institutions. Therefore, expenditure on all levels of education should be increased. In 2020 to 2021, the per capita public expenditure on elementary education differs considerably across states from as high as rupees 96,968 in Sikkim to as low as rupees 10,710 in Bihar. This leads to differences in educational opportunities and attainments across states. One can understand the inadequacy of the expenditure on education if we compare it with the desired level of education expenditure as recommended by the various commissions. The Education Commission 1964 to 66 had recommended that at least 6% of GDP be spent on education so as to make a noticeable rate of growth in educational achievements. 6% कम से कम 6% जीडीपी का जीडीपी जितनी भी है उसका 6% अगर हम खर्च करेंगे स्पेंड ऑन एजुकेशन खर्च करेंगे तो स्टेबल रेट ग्रोथ एजुकेशन में होगा। The Tapas Majumdar Committee, appointed by the Government of India 1999, estimated an expenditure of around 1.37 lakh crore over 10 years, 1998 to 1999 to 2006 to 7, to bring all Indian children in the age group of 6 to 14 years under the purview of school education. Compared to this desired level of education expenditure of around 6% of GDP, the current level of a little over 4% has been quite inadequate. In principle, a goal of 6% needs to be reached. This has been accepted as a must for the coming years. In 2009, the Government of India enacted the Right of Children to Free and Compulsory Education Act to make free education a fundamental right of all children in the age group of 6 to 14 years. Government of India has also started levying a 2% education cess on all union taxes. The revenues from education cess has been earmarked for spending on elementary education. In addition to this, the government sanctions a large outlay for the promotion of higher education and new loan schemes for students to pursue higher education. Educational achievements in India. Generally, educational achievements in a country are indicated in terms of adult literacy level, primary education completion rate, and youth literacy rate. These statistics for the last 2 decades are given above in 4.2. 4.7 Future prospects. Education for all is still a distant dream. Though literacy rates for both adults as well as youth have increased, still the absolute number of illiterates in India in as much as India's population was at the time of independence. In 1950, when the Constitution of India was passed by the Constituent Assembly, it was noted in the directive principles of Directive principles of constitutions that the government should provide free and compulsory education for all children up to the age of 14 years within 10 years for the commencement of the constitution. Had we achieved this, we would have 100% literacy by now. Gender equity, better than before. The differences in literacy rates between males and females are narrowing, signifying a positive development in gender equity. Still, the need to promote education for women in India is imminent. सन्निकट पास में फॉर वेरियस बहुत बढ़िया कहाँ चला गया मेरा for various reasons, such as improving economic independence and social status of women, and also because women education makes a favorable impact on fertility rate and health care of women and children. Therefore, we cannot be complacent about the upward movement in the literacy rates, and we have miles to go in achieving 100% adult literacy. अब आ जाते हैं हायर एजुकेशन a few takers. The Indian education pyramid is steep, indicating lesser and lesser number of people reaching the higher education level. Moreover, the level of unemployment among educated youth is highest. As per NSSO data, in the year 2011 to 12, the rate of unemployment among youth males who studied graduation and above in rural areas was 19%. Their urban counterparts had relatively less level of unemployment at 16%. The most severely affected ones were young rural female graduates, as nearly 30% of them are unemployed. In contrast to this, only about 3 to 6% of primary level educated youth in rural and urban areas were unemployed. The situation has improved moderately as indicated by the periodic labor force survey to 2022 to 2023. Nevertheless, the government should increase allocation for higher education and also improve the standard of higher education institutions so that students are imparted employable skills in such institutions when compared to less educated. A large proportion of educated persons are unemployed, and why? इनका conclusion है, the economic and social benefits of human capital formation and human development are well known. The union and state governments in India have been earmarking substantial financial outlays for development of education and health sectors. The spread of education and health services across different sectors of society should be ensured so as to simultaneously attain economic growth and equity. India has a rich stock of scientific and technical manpower in the world. The need of the hour is to better it qualita- qualitatively and provide such conditions so that they are utilized in India. इसके बाद ये रिकैप इसको भी देख लेते हैं. Investments in education convert human beings into human capital. Human capital represents enhanced labor productivity, which is an acquired ability and an outcome of deliberate investment decisions with an expectations that it will increase future income sources. Investments in education, on-the-job training, health, migration, and information are the sources of human capital formation. The concept of physical capital is the base for conceptualizing human capital. There are some similarities as well as dissimilarities between the two forms of capital formation. Investment in human capital formation is considered as efficient and growth enhancing. Human development is based on the idea that education and health are integral to human well-being because only when people have the ability to read and write and the ability to lead a long and healthy life will they be able to make other choices which they value. The percentage of expenditure on education of the total government expenditure indicates the importance of education in the scheme of things for the गवर्नमेंट. और इसी के साथ ये चैप्टर हो जाता है आपका समाप्त. अब मिलेंगे अब अगले चैप्टर में.